Hey, it's Arvid. You're listening to the Bootstrapped Founder. Today, I'm catching up with Brian Sierakowski. If you ever wondered what a changelog can do for you, this conversation is for you. Brian shares his indie hacking journey of 2024, building a SaaS in the changelog space as well as a hardware startup at the same time. Ever the true indie hacker, he shares behind-the-scenes insights from this 0 to 1 stage of two amazing businesses. This episode is sponsored by Paddle.com, my personal payment provider of choice. I get to work on my business full-time because Paddle takes care of all the money stuff. They have great APIs, a massive analytics and insights platform, and Paddle actually acquired Profitwell for this a few years ago. And funny enough, Brian was the CEO of one of their main competitors back in the day. In the SaaS world, we are all connected, and Paddle makes it easy to get paid, so check them out at Paddle.com. Brian, welcome back to the show. 125-ish episodes ago, I think episode 238 was it? In early August 2023 was the last time we talked, and we had this very enjoyable conversation about what you had been doing up until then, and it ended with a cliffhanger. That I really enjoyed about our chat. You had a few entrepreneurial plans, so let's catch up and see what happened in the meantime. Brian, was 2024 good to you as a founder?
Yeah, I think so. It's so funny. I've done kind of entrepreneurial stuff for a long time now. I'm also the entrepreneur in residence at our local accelerator. So I'm kind of like constantly talking to people in that 0 to 1 space. And I feel like every single time that I go through it, I'm just reminded of like how much harder it is. And like, it takes a lot of time. And I feel like every single time you move into that space, you realize how much you don't know, because it's always like from the outset, I'm like, yeah, I know what I'm doing. I've built businesses before and I've been successful, and I failed in the past, but I'm not going to
not in the present,
fail again in the future. Yeah, it's like how silly would that be to fail again? So yeah, I feel like this past year in particular, just like a lot of the things that I've like kind of had the belief around, even around like I'd say before this year, like even thinking about founding team, I was very kind of like figure it out yourself first. And I think this last year I've been like, oh, well, build a team around you first, like kind of understanding the value of co-founders and again, appreciating everything taking time. And I've had a little bit of cross training because I'm usually like a B2B SaaS guy. I got a chance to work with a hardware company that's B2C. Which is like totally different and in fact way harder. So it's actually like I'm kind of like running back to B2B SaaS. I'm like, man, like get me out of it. Like hardware's like right, like we're just like, oh, we need more batteries. And there's like one factory in the world that makes batteries the way that we do. And like we can sell more product when that factory thinks it's appropriate to ship, and then we have to get it shipped. It's all these things of like the delivery of software is not like it. So yeah, I would say, this year's been a whirlwind, but it's been great. And I really feel like there's been a lot of culmination going on. Like a lot of the lessons that the universe has tried to teach me over the past couple of years are like actually I feel like sinking in the past year.
Oh man, that's great to hear. And yeah, that sounds like a lot to deal with and a lot of different things to deal with, like very opposing things, B2B SaaS, B2C, a hardware thing. Let's talk about it all. Let's dive into the details, because those lessons that you have learned and are now applying, I would also like to learn and apply. So, and probably everybody listening. So yeah, let's maybe start with the SaaS here, because that was, I think, the idea that you had, or that was kind of like just brewing in the background back in the day, right?
Yeah.
So what was the idea back then, and how did it progress from there?
Yeah, I did the thing that I feel like every SaaS founder, especially like multi-time founder, does, of like you get to the end of a journey such as it was, and you kind of think about the next thing, and you're not necessarily thinking about diving back into entrepreneurship, but you kind of like, at least this is what I do, and I think this is pretty common, of like you kind of look back in your recent experience and be like, well, what was really frustrating and what sucked and like what, and maybe also if you're lucky, like what's changed in the world such that we can like solve that problem. And so I thought back to my time at Team Password, and we were kind of like constantly owned by not updating our changelog. And I remember like it happened a bunch, but I remember we had this one sales conversation and the guy I was working with was really nice. And it was like this enterprise that was really like way outside the size of like who we should like. They went with another company. I think they went with LastPass. But the person I was working with was really trying to, was trying to do a good job at like bringing Team Password up in the best possible light. And so he like shared the spreadsheet with me of like, here's like how we compared all the different tools. And like, it was like, this might be my memory. But I remember, product like frequently updated was like the first item on the list. And we had like a big X through ours. And it wasn't the case that we weren't updating the product frequently, so that we weren't updating a changelog and we weren't doing those extra steps. And then I also, fast forwarding a little bit, my experience at Baremetrics. There's a whole episode about, kind of the price increase, but I kind of think back to that and it's like, we were doing a ton of product work and we had this big bug backlog. And when we did the price increase, we got totally owned. Again, anybody who wants to like, revisit that, we've got a full episode on it. But I just kind of think back of like, well, what if there was a world where we were like once a month updating that? Or what if we were updating that changelog like once a week? Or what if we had like 3 to 5 updates a week in that changelog for like a year? And then when we announce a price increase, there's like, 100 updates. That's a much different like, and we didn't have to do any more product work. We had to tell people about it. So that was kind of the problem that sort of stuck with me. And so I'm like, well, can we solve this? Like, how do I make sure that Brian in the future, like never gets owned by like a changelog related problem in the future? And that's really kind of where all the AI stuff came in. And that was sort of the switch for us because the idea before that was like, one of the problems with writing changelogs is that it's very unique work. Like you need to be like technical enough to understand the changes. You need to understand the customers. You need to be able to understand what the, product team is, there's like a whole process that this went through. And then you need to have enough like sales and marketing so that you can take that change and phrase it in such a way that like, here's why we did it. Here's why your company should pay us more money, or, like here's the business benefit to making this change. And everybody is super busy. So the idea sort of before we got to what we've landed on right now was like, well, we could kind of centralize all this information in one place. Like right now, there's like conversation happening in GitHub. There's conversations happening in Linear or whatever PM tool you're using. There's like Slack conversations. And then there's actually like code being written. There's like pull requests and like diffs, like actual like lines of code changing. So that was kind of our first idea of like, maybe we can like centralize all these things in one place so that a human could possibly do it. Not that they will be able to be successful, but like it's just like literally impossible task if you don't have that information in front of you. And so then AI comes along and, they kind of like, you get the audacious idea of like, what if the changelog just writes itself? Like, what if we could train an engine that, the first version, I kind of make the joke that we're on like update engine 6 right now. The first version, we're like, hey, what if we just like ship a bunch of commit messages over to OpenAI and say, write our updates. And that obviously sucks for a lot of reasons. And, we've gone through tons and tons and tons of changes where it's like, oh, well, you just like, I think that's one of the cool things about the AI development cycle is like, it becomes very apparent where the gaps are. It's like, oh, like this update's just like, doesn't have enough information. So, okay, cool. We need to bring in more context. And then it's like, oh, like this was technically correct, but it doesn't understand who our customers are. It's like, okay, cool. We need to like load in context about the business. And then like, oh, this update is correct for the customers and correct for what the change is, but it doesn't understand the history of the product. So, okay, we need to build in kind of that, so we kind of, it's like pipelines on top of pipelines. And eventually you get to the point where hopefully, I think we still have like, I'd say the update engine's like 80% of the way there. But like you get to the point where it's like, oh, like I remember it was like earlier this year, the first update was written. And I'm like, oh, this is like, I would share this with people. Holy crap. Like, the computer did this for me. And doing that through a bunch of different changes there. So, sorry, it was a little bit of a ramble.
That was exciting.
Very accelerated, journey. But yeah, that's kind of where we got to today of like getting to a product where, we're still in the phase of like, I want to get to the point where this is like a tool that's like indispensable to people, and something that also can kind of operate hands-free. And so, that's kind of the phase we're in now of kind of going to people and trying to be like, convince them. I've also learned a lot about like AI, and an interesting insight that I've had recently is that people are like pretty burned by AI. I was talking to a guy just like earlier, and he was like, "Yeah, I think your product's really cool, but I just like don't believe it." And I'm like, "What do you mean?" And he's like, "Well, it's like, yeah, I've signed up for a bunch of different AI stuff, and they all like make all these huge promises, and like it doesn't, none of them ever worked out. And so we're actually building like weaker versions of our product, not because we can't automatically like we can read the code changes, understand the diffs, and actually write the updates, even if the commit messages are terrible, which they frequently are. So we've actually had to kind of take a step back and be like, okay, we kind of need to. People are just like maybe not going to believe that the product can do that. So we need to like walk them into like, okay, well, what if we just build like a really nice changelog that is hosted for you and integrates and does all this like distribution stuff for you? But that's been a really interesting learning as well of like some people we're in the stage of the AI hype cycle where people have tried AI stuff and they are chat GPT wrappers that don't actually deliver on the promise. And so now we need to handle that from like a marketing and from a product perspective.
I've heard this a couple times. I've actually seen this with several people that I talked to recently, is that people just do not trust AI because they've been burned. And to be able to convince them, you effectively need to give them access to the product for free because otherwise they just do not believe it. Like even if you show them a demo, they're like, this is just a demo. This could be like wired together in the background. They want to have this magic moment that they so desperately it's still kind of internally believe can exist, but have been burnt away from. And that is actually a big expense for founders that makes it really hard to calculate stuff like what is the cost of acquisition here? Like, do I need to give this person access to the full tool and they need to be able to like spend $50 worth of OpenAI credits just to be able to get that one first magic moment? Like that is a problem. How do you deal with this kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think that one of the interesting things is like in our strategy to kind of stair step people into the product, all of the most expensive AI stuff is kind of at the, like our full imagining of the product is also the most expensive from like a credits perspective. So like the initial like kind of like phase 0 is like, well, if you don't have a changelog that's public, I think that's really important to us. Like at the outset of this project, I wrote a 92-page blog post about why like updates are important and all that sort of stuff. So I kind of like, it was supposed to just be like a one pager to, anyway, you know how that goes. Mm-hmm. Somebody who's written a book before, maybe by accident. But yeah, so that was kind of the initial thing of like, well, why don't we just like go into the space and provide a changelog that's easy to update and that, kind of one of the kind of initial ideas is like, we undershare these updates. So kind of building in a lot of the distribution stuff of like, okay, people are barely publishing enough updates, but it's like, okay, well, are you sharing it to social? Are you resharing it to social? Are you capturing an email list? We kind of have this like full suite of like distribution style features that really have nothing to do with AI, but are kind of like necessary to kind of achieve the goal of, the 92-page blog post. And then kind of like stair stepping people into it. So kind of the next level up, kind of the middle tier. And this is kind of how we're doing our pricing as well, or at least thinking about it now. It's like the first one is like just a changelog. And I don't remember the number we put on it. It's like, $40 a month or $30 a month or something like that, and then
it's not too high.
Yeah. And then the next one up is like, okay, now we're going to put the power in your hands. And so you can connect your GitHub account, you can connect your Linear account, but you can go through and I don't know if we should be kind of sharing this analogy publicly, but it's really made sense to us. It's like you can kind of create like a shopping cart of like, hey, like I want to write an update. Here are the Linear tickets that are relevant. Here are the pull requests, or here's the commits that are relevant. And then as we like add more integrations in, it's like, hey, here's the Slack conversation or whatever, And then I'm going to direct the AI and say like, hey, this is what we want to write the update around. And so that's kind of like the middle ground of like, there's a human in the loop, but it's kind of, there's that frustrating thing when you go to write an update, you launch the page and it's a blank sheet of paper and you have to write it. So, that's kind of the middle tier. And then the tier that kind of where we started and what we thought people were going to want, but it turns out people are kind of most skeptical about, there's this sort of like autopilot feature of like, yeah, we'll just like monitor all the changes that are happening within your company. We will do an evaluation of whether or not this is worth writing about. Like, and that's really comes down to like, do we think there's customer value on the other side of this thing? which is obviously a little bit fuzzy and something we obviously there's obvious room for improvement there. And then we will tell you, like, we'll kind of serve as like your junior product marketing associate, and this this helpful little bot's going to like bring you updates and say like, hey, if you want to edit it, you're welcome to edit it, or you can just approve it through. And so that's kind of like the premium tier. That's like the $4.99 a month version. And so we came to that idea not through like a means of like monetization, but just from like, well, if we can't get people to trust us with like writing the updates at all, then it just feels like it's just a big leap to be like, hey, it's just the kind of startup problem too. It's like, hey, we're this startup. I'm Brian. You might have seen me online. You might have seen some positive things or some negative things, but here I am. And if you don't mind, we'd love for you to sign up for an account, create a password. And oh, by the way, we want you to connect your GitHub, and we want to connect your project management tool and your CMS. And then maybe we can deliver you some value. It's like kind of exactly what you were saying. It's like that moment of like epiphany is like behind, oh, like, wait, I have to give you access to all my source code. Like, what are you doing with this? Or a lot of times we have people like, hey, can you just read the commit message and not the diffs? And it's like, yeah, we tried that, man. I'm sorry. Like we wish we could do that too, but we actually realized we needed like a step in the process to like actually review the diff and understand the nature of the code being changed in the context of who your business is, and like in the way that a human would, right? It's like they wouldn't just like look at the message and be like, this is what it is. They would probably have a meeting, which sucks, with with one of the developers and be like, what is the nature of this change? Like, why are we doing this? And so we kind of have to do that stuff.
Yeah, and then the developer would translate the code that they have in their mind into something that can actually be communicated, which is what the AI does too. It brings me to another point, because like the first thing we talked about was people being skeptical of AI in general, like of the promise of AI and the results that it can deliver, but sometimes does not if people don't really put the effort in, which you're clearly doing. Like this feels like a very, very interesting. Like I'm, as a software developer and entrepreneur, I'm super excited by this. I'm trying to contain my excitement for this conversation so we can actually talk about,
Please, I don't blush too much,
But no, it's really, really cool, because I also struggle with this. So it's a pain point that I feel right now. But I also like feel the other side of things, the entrepreneurial side, where people are like, AI, we don't trust it. And AI, you can't trust it. Like that's the other thing, like the whole privacy angle of things, right? And I talk to a lot of people who run AI assisted or AI enabled businesses that have, for that reason, went into local LLMs and on-premise deployment, or cloud, like private cloud kind of stuff. So where's your perspective with ChangeBot there? Like, is it going to stay a SaaS, or are you going to go into the enterprisey kind of, oh no, you run your own AI kind of thing?
Yeah, that's a really great question. And so there's kind of like two different directions on that. So, just in like the sheer choice of tools, it feels like we are, I don't know, it changes like every month, but it feels like using like models specifically trained around a specific task will get you the best results. So for example, we should use a model, if we're doing code comprehension, we should use a different model than the model that is writing the update and taking all that data and writing prose. And so I think like that's kind of like one big piece of when you talking about getting like, where are we going to host this and where's it going to be and who, what's involved. I think a big part of that is like, well, how, again, our very first goal was like the updates need to be well written, like, because if we don't get there, then it's like nobody's going to use the product. Those were kind of like, we have three product pillars. Like one, the updates are like great, they're well written. And then the second thing is that there are a lot of them, because it's like if we can write a great update, but it's only once a year, it's like, okay, we can beat that. And then the third thing is that the updates are everywhere. And so it's like, well, it's like, okay, you have all these great updates that are well written, and there's a ton of them, but if nobody ever gets a chance to read them, then you don't get the value. So that's kind of a part of it from the technology perspective. We want to be really, I don't know. And again, it's like the next version of OpenAI or whoever, next state of the art could come out, and maybe the code evaluation in that new model is better than all the other ones, and you can kind of like go back into one. But I think that's kind of a core consideration of like, from like a security perspective and from a data perspective of like, well, which tools are you using? You get some benefits also out of using these big models, because it's like some of the things that if you're going to locally host an LLM, then you need to be worried about leaks, and you need to be worried about things like your model sharing data from one customer with another customer, and like you kind of run into that area. So we're kind of the perspective of like we've done a lot of work in this space, but we had one of our potential customers be like, hey, can you like share a document with me of like, what are you doing from a security perspective? And I'm like, oh yeah, that totally makes sense as far as why you would want that. And we should write that up. But we're kind of going through the process right now. Maybe by the time this launches, we can have that to point to as an example. But there's all this stuff you can do as far as like, well, what do you encrypt and what do you store? And like, for us, we don't store any of your code because we don't need any of your code. And we also have kind of the special benefit of like, because we're writing changelog entries, the end result of what we're generating is meant to be public. So like, even as we are going through the process, like we're not asking for anything that's like, we're kind of almost intentionally turning down any sort of tech talk that might indicate what's going on behind under the hood, because it's like, that's also just like not relevant. And it's like an error case. Like it's like a failed eval for us if like the update is too technical. What sometimes it will do if the update is too small and the LLM's like just looking for stuff to like, oh, we have to kind of like talk about this a little bit more. But yeah, I think it's like, it's really important to like do all the normal data security stuff, right? So it's like, don't store more information than you need, obviously. And anything that's like sensitive, it needs to be encrypted. And you also need to make sure that you are conscious of all the new LLM stuff. So like leaks are like a really big thing of like data from one customer. And it's kind of funny to consider this because like this was the, 10 years ago in web development, it was like really common for data from one customer to get into another, like kind of the idea of having a multi-tenant web application was like, that was like a new idea. And so it almost feels like we're kind of back there. And I sort of feel like the same lessons that we learned 10 years ago on the web, we need to do the same thing. The one thing that we haven't done this yet, but it's maybe to your point of like joining those two topics together of like the right tools plus like the right process is we've thought that once we have a bunch of customers and we have people editing the updates, so we're delivering updates and maybe they're editing them, it might make sense to do a like unique fine-tuned model for each of those customers just based off of the style of that. Like it's like wholly outside of who your company is and what you do and anything else. It's just like this is the style of update that we like, and that's kind of like a nice like kind of final surface layer that we can apply that will just, this is like we know what the inputs were and we know what you want the outputs to be. So that's kind of like a nice fine-tuning situation to be in. So that might be a situation of like maybe that final mile goes with the customer, or even where to host it is kind of an open question. But I've also kind of learned too, it's like, it's kind of the classic thing of like, people don't want to deal with this stuff, which is why they're not, it's why they're not doing it now. So I think for the foreseeable future, we will, regardless of what the infrastructure decision is, we'll manage it. But we have gotten a lot of, it's funny you mentioned, I'll say one last thing. You asked one question and you set me off, man.
I don't mind.
One of the big questions we had is like, who is this product for? And those were the two paths. It's like, hey, this could be for larger enterprises who, I spoke with one woman who runs she's like, we have a huge product marketing team. Their company has 1,000 employees and they have 8 people in the product marketing. And that's like a huge product marketing team. So it's like product marketing teams are like, it's like them versus the world. And so that's where we really got a lot of the insights of just centralizing. For them, it's like, if we could just pull, even without doing all the AI stuff, if we just pull all of that information about what's going on inside of the organization into one place, that would be super useful to them. Like that's probably an open opportunity. And that kind of takes us in like a top-down product strategy where we're like, okay, well, what systems do you have? Where is that information? What format is it in natively? What format do you need to be in? And we can kind of like custom build a product based off of that enterprise. And there's some common shared core across all of those different products, but it would be like a very like integrations and kind of a, there would be like a 3-month onboarding, it's like, it would be like an enterprise sales thing. And so we've actually decided to move more for smaller teams that are, maybe they don't have 1,000 employees, maybe they have like 5. But the thing that I went back and forth on this for a long time. The thing that we did is that we realized that this would allow us to do kind of a bottom-up approach of like, okay, well, what are the core features that all of these businesses care about? And how can we kind of automate as much of this as possible? Not that we're not trying to do customization, because that's the name of the game. It's like, hey, if we have somebody, they're like, hey, we love this like autopilot plan that you have, but we don't use Linear, we use Jira. We'll be like, great, we will build that. Like, it's like, because other companies use that as well. But that was kind of the key like strategy shift, was like, we wanted to be much more focused on the bottom up approach of like really discovering like what this product is and what it should do. And even all the distribution stuff came directly out of customers. It was like, well, the feedback like over the past like 8 months was like, update sucks, update sucks, update sucks. And it's like, oh, update's good. Need to be able to edit it. It's okay. Can edit it. All right, now I need it to be everywhere. It's like, okay, great. And then now it's like, okay, I need to be able to like capture an email list and like send like a automated monthly update. It's like, okay. So it's like as soon as you kind of clear the one hurdle, like until you clear the hurdle, that's all you hear. It's just like update sucks, which was fair feedback, and they did suck. But then once you clear the hurdle, it's like every single time you jump the next one, there's another one coming. And I know once we build all these features, there'll be another request on the way for sure.
Yeah, and it does sound like you have found several, if not very, very many points of complexity where going into the complexity just opens it up for more complexity, right? Like the example of you're getting no's, and then you get a yes, and after that yes, all of a sudden it's a whole new world with another set of surprises. Man, that sounds like a lot of layers that you have to work through. And I work with AI tooling as well. I know those layers and the weird idiosyncratic kind of stuff that happens in there. Plus then trying to also solve this for enterprise customers who have this very, we want this and this is the only way it's allowed to be mindset. That is also a challenge for a startup, right? A startup that has to deal with custom requirements on every single level, the integrations that you talked about, man, that must be so hard. How do you deal with this? Because it feels like if you want to go for smaller customers or smaller businesses, that still probably doesn't solve the problem with people choosing very different tools for similar jobs. Are you going to just take the top 5 product management systems and the top 3 code repositories and deal with that? Like, how are you going to approach this over time?
Yeah, that's a big change in my like mentality. I think, especially like maybe not in the past year, but like especially like 5-10 years ago. I think that I definitely had much more of like a headstrong mentality of like, I know what the market needs, and I am, whatever. I'm like Steve Jobs or whatever. And, like I'm wearing turtlenecks, I'm doing the whole thing. And like, I will tell you, market, like what this is what you're missing out on, and this is what you need. And like, now I'm just kind of like, the thing that I always come back to, because like running a product and building a new product is like very challenging, both like the actual like what to do and how to do it, but also just kind of like keeping motivated when someone tells you that your updates suck or whatever, or like, oh, we don't need this, or whatever the case is. Like the reality is like, even if you get to 1 million customers, there's another like billion companies in the world that said no to you. So the thing I always come back to is like, I never want to run another company again without having like a constant stream of updates for the marketing team, for the sales, whatever. So because of that, that's kind of my core. And I have those like 3 pillars. Those are the kind of like, those are the non-negotiables. And then everything else is like, if a customer comes to me and be like, oh, I'd really like to do this. At this stage, like we have few enough customers, I can have one-on-one conversations with everybody. We kind of just, my CTO, my co-founder's name is Ara. And so he'll probably listen to this and like slap his forehead, but it's kind of like, we kind of just do it. It's like, as long as it's in line with those product pillars, it doesn't take the product in a different direction. It's like, yeah, if we have somebody, like we've already gotten a request for GitLab, which instead of GitHub, which is insane to me, because it's like, how many customers does GitHub have? It's like, I thought it was like all of them. But it's like, okay, cool. Like, and maybe there's an argument, there's even less tooling in GitLab, but it's kind of like, yeah, once we have this system set up and we understand the nature of Git, it's like, yeah, we'll do GitLab, sure. And it's all about prioritizing them. But I kind of feel like especially for us, and maybe it's also this type of product where it's like, the more information that we can pull in, the more context we can get in, the better the result's going to be. And also the more time savings is going to be to the person. So it's like, it's going to be like really great updates and they don't have to really edit it at all. So it's kind of almost like, because of that, we've sort of like resigned ourselves to like, okay, we're just going to be building a bunch of integrations. And like, it's hard enough to convince somebody that they need more updates. And like, once we find somebody who like understands that pain, to be like, yeah, we're the person to help you with that. We're not going to be like, oh, well, you should also switch off of like GitLab onto Git. It's like,
don't force them to do these kind of things, right? You just use what they use.
Totally. So I think it's just kind of like, and we can only move as fast as we can go. And we also like, my mentality is sort of working from like the center out or the bottom up, whatever, pick another analogy that I've made so far. But it's like, we want to make sure that our current customers are like as excited about the product and are using it and are like, we can see how frequently they're publishing updates and like that needs to be happening. And if that falls off, I'm going to like reach out to them and be like, what's going on? And why is that? Or like, oh, I was going to get to it, but I got busy. And I'm like, well, why is it like that big of a task that you need to, so kind of starting with those people. And then kind of, we have people starting trials and coming in all the time. Basically everybody, they first connect like a marketing site instead of their product because they're like, what is this thing? And so that's something for us to work around. And maybe that's a feature. Maybe we provide updates around the changes to your marketing site. But then it's just a function of like, okay, like, or maybe they don't have permissions to the repo, all those sorts of stuff. So that's kind of all the stuff for us to work through. But yeah, we just kind of make a backlog. And I'm sure at some point in time, we'll need to say no to an integration, but like, I don't even know if that's going to happen it's like never know. It's like not in 2025, I don't think, but it's like it'll be something where I think we're just going to have to get a lot better about having sort of more transparency around like where someone asked me today, like what the roadmap was, and I was able to kind of like rattle off a couple of things. And then I forgot one thing and I'm like, oh, this is actually in position 3 and everything else got pushed over. And so, that could, I don't know, that could get to like 50 requests like pretty quickly. And then at that point, we need to probably do a better job of just being like, hey, we can't support whatever. We don't support like WordPress. You can't publish the WordPress right now. And with what's going on in WordPress, maybe we might like wait.
Probably a good idea.
Wait a little bit, but that'll be something in the future as far as like how we can kind of communicate around that.
That makes sense. And integrations always are a lot of effort to put something into the system because you always need to deal with the little tiny issues there and the slightly different ways that they do it compared to somebody else. It kind of makes you think as a founder that if you build a tool like what ChangeBot is that has a lot of data sources it needs to pull data from and has a lot of destinations it needs to send data to, your integration kernel, like the thing in the middle that allows you to integrate into and then distribute from, needs to be highly flexible, right? It needs to be very, very flexible and be able to deal with all kinds of weird little issues along the way. And I think that's something that every SaaS founder can take away from this. Like if you don't know what your customers use in terms of tools, be super flexible to be able to integrate them along the way.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also about like kind of like transforming each of the different like integrations into a format that's like natively useful.
Yes.
So it's like transition. For us, like, the end result of like what we wind up storing is sort of like the summary of changes. And so it's like, and like kind of like, that's very easy for us to include in, doing all the RAG stuff and, all that sorts of stuff, and so it's like, I think that's kind of how we look at everything should, kind of transforming all those data points into sort of a similar format so that it almost like, and maybe it will, like maybe next year we'll revisit this conversation. I'm like, Arvid, I was so wrong about, I was so wrong about that. But I don't think that it necessarily matters that like, oh, this conversation was in linear and this conversation was in GitHub issues. It's like, it's all of that just turns into context around the nature of the changes and it's timestamped as far as when it was happening. And it's like related to, we'll do like clustering and stuff like that to understand like what things are connected. But, I think that will allow us to get to the point where it's like, well, again, I mentioned Slack offhand. I don't know if we'll wind up doing that, but there is kind of this recurring thread of like, well, what if ChangeBot was like kind of sitting in the room while these conversations are happening? And I don't even know how that would work. It's one of those things, again, it's like, I guess that's the other fun thing with AI of like, I just never would think to do a feature like that. But there's also a world it's like, okay, well, like let's coerce those conversations into that same format, that same context format, and then let's just include it and see what happens. Like that would probably be how we would roll that feature out.
Yeah, it's really interesting because then you could kind of take out of all the conversations that happen, find the ones that may have to do with new features and suggest them to be part of this. Or maybe people say, no, this is not one. Maybe this is one. Maybe there's like a human step in between, or an AI is smart enough to figure this all out. Just present the results. You're right. You don't really think about these things because they just would have been impossible a couple of years ago, right? It's bizarre. Hey, I really like the technical side of things, and I could talk about this for hours. I probably shouldn't, which is why I'm going to pivot this a little bit to the actual the impact side of things. Like when you have a changelog, first off, maybe why should you have a changelog? That's something I personally often struggle with, not to have one, but to fill it, like to actually communicate, to push information to my customers. Like what is the benefit of this? How often should it happen? What should you talk about? Can you give me can you condense your 92-page thing into maybe 92 seconds statement here?
Yeah, I think that's fair, and that's a very common request that I get. So I understand that. Yeah, I think that and for me, I'm coming from personal experience. So that feeling of being having a potential customer comparing me to other companies and not being able to put my best foot forward and showing what we're doing and that we're actively engaged. I've heard the story from other founders of because they're not active on social or wherever, somebody be like, oh, I thought you guys were dead. That's a very common phrase. And it's no, we're actually working 80 hours a week. And, it's just finding this excess time. I think people always find themselves in the spot, especially small teams, where they're well, I can spend 8 hours and build a feature. And then I could spend another 4 hours and write about that and do a really great job of writing about that change I just made. Or I could be halfway through another feature. And so that's the trade-off. And so, I think that that's the thing of and also there's the barometric story too, right? Of if you want to make a big change with the business, it's one of those things where it's you really wish you were doing this all along. So I kind of, and this is one of the challenges that I have with marketing the product, is because I kind of see this from a three-dimensional perspective, and I kind of look at each team. I look at from the top end of from sales, giving them this resource where it's oh, you're comparing us to this company. It's oh, well, we're updating our product much more frequently. And we're we used to compete with ChartMogul back at Barometrics. And so I was that was also one of the formative experiences, because ChartMogul has a fantastic marketing team. And they would, again, in my extremely biased opinion, they would make a big deal about a feature that was not necessarily a big deal. But I was on the other side, and our customers would see that. And I feel there's just it's death by a thousand cuts. It's even they see it, and then maybe something comes up in the future. So, and they're okay, well, maybe we'll try out ChartMogul because they're doing all these great, amazing, revolutionary things. Again, not to downplay their product, and I'm insanely biased. You should not listen to anything I have to say about ChartMogul. But that was kind of one of our original tagline was make your competitors hate you. And so that was really a very sales and marketing focused message for the marketing team. It's having finding important things to talk about that is you want to be kind of present always, but it's you can only share so many memes. And I know I'm the worst for this. I share too many memes. But it's even those little small updates, small improvements just gives the marketing team something valuable to talk about. And it's hey, even I think one of the biggest shifts is how small of an update are you willing to talk about? And I think there's different levels. I don't think you should do an email blast to all of your customers for changing an email form on the page. But I do think it's it kind of should go somewhere. Maybe changing a form is too small. But it's oh, we fixed this issue when you update your email or whatever, something like that. It's hey, there's this little frustration that somebody reported to us and we fixed. Just having signal on that is just really valuable. And it could be a little tiny social thing that goes out, a little bit of, Twitter juice, blue sky juice, whatever, LinkedIn. And so, yeah, so you kind of take it all the way through the funnel. So it's useful for the sales team, useful for marketing. I think it's useful from an operational perspective internally to know what's going on here. And I think about churn prevention and kind of upsells. So at Barometrics, we had a big problem of upselling because people just didn't know of all the features that we had. And they were like missing out. Like I know for a fact, I would have conversations with people and I was like, well, why aren't you using this? They're like, oh, we don't know why our customers are canceling. I wish we had some insights around why our customers are canceling. And I'm like, oh, did you know we have a product called Cancellation Insights? They'd be like, no. It's like, well, shit, man. And so like there's an upsell thing, but I also kind of have this like anti-churn path as well, where it's like, I think you should be sending your customers more updates than you're sending them invoices. If you ask them for money more frequently than you're letting them know about new things that are happening, it's like anything, just like, hey, we're alive, because they will get the invoice. Like even if you don't send email notifications, which you should, they'll see on their credit card statement that you charge them. And so I think there's just a huge anti-churn, churn prevention technique of like, hey, like we can see that the product is improving. And I think that feeds in the product as well. It's like, if you have the impression that the product is not being worked on and you're like, oh, I don't know what they're doing over there. I don't know what they're focused on. I don't know if they're doing anything. Like people are very unlikely to reach out and say like, hey, I really need you to, I think that's been really huge for Terminal, the hardware product that we mentioned. They're just so active and so reactive as far as fixing things. And there's like a whole developer Discord community. Like I've really seen that of like, it's accelerated because people are like, oh, they do care. They do stuff. Like they react to questions that we have, or they react to problems, and they like ship. And it's like, oh, like especially for a hardware company, it's incredible. It's like, oh, like this thing wasn't working and now it's working. And like I've noticed that the rate of engagement has gone up dramatically. So
yeah. Oh, for sure.
So it's almost like what is the value of writing a changelog? And I'm like, well, it's like a shorter list of like what benefits it doesn't, like it's kind of all the stuff that you want to do as a business come from the ability to like both have that content and get it out in front of people.
I love this. To me, the term that comes to mind is value nurturing, right? The idea that you kind of grow the seed of value perception in your customers by constantly watering it. That's what it is, right?
It's content marketing. I think content marketing happened in an age where people were very like top of funnel, like new customer focused. And I kind of, in the back of my mind, I've had this thing of like, I think this like product customer update, it's like kind of like the new content marketing focused at retention and expansion. Now that everybody kind of realized like, oh, it's not enough to get new customers. We need to keep the ones that we have. It's like, that's kind of like the wildest, as before I go to sleep at night, put my head down on the pillow. Like, what's like the wildest, like, what's the biggest that this product could be? And it's like, oh, it's like the HubSpot, but instead of focusing on top of funnel, it's focusing on kind of, from sign up through the entire life of the business. Like if we can like 3x your LTV on every single customer, that becomes especially if it does it automatically, that becomes a very valuable product and a very valuable company.
It does feel like a changelog, and not just the changelog, because that's the artifact, right? But the communication strategy, the deployment distribution method around it, that is the relationship builder. That is something that retains a relationship, obviously, like a financial relationship. They stay customers, but it also builds reputation for you. Because when I look at the ChangeBot changelog, it's a mouthful, and it goes back to like, what is it, March 2024 with the first example posted, and then you scroll up and scroll up and you see all these individual changelog entries, several for certain days, and then it's just so cool to see this whole development of a thing and the effort that goes into it. And that's the reputational part, right? You see, this is not just a tool that somebody cobbled together. This is something that grew from conversations, that grew from feedback, that grew from involvement with the customer base. Just having that as a place that people can just be astounded by what went into the tool itself, having that for my own SaaS is something I want. Like, it makes me want to communicate more, because every single part of this chain of communication then is a relic for people to kind of pull up and see, oh, wow, this is an old log, but they already, like 3 years ago, they already put in so much effort and it's still going. That must be something in there.
Yeah, I haven't been able to quantify that. And I think probably like it would be very valuable to my marketing if I could, but there is kind of like when you like go to like a very old building or something, it's like, I don't know, there's just like a different mode we go into as humans of like, oh, this is like something that's been like worked on for like a very long time. And like a lot of effort, so much of the effort that we put into our products, like just goes like nowhere. Like most of the people will build a feature and then not talk about it at all, which is like, again, it's like, the tree falling in the forest. Like, but then it's like, we also, this is like a total tangent, but something I heard kind of like just right at the right time. There's a artist called Tyler, the Creator, and he kind of went on a tirade about like how people will like release an album and then like tweet about it once. And he did nothing but talk about the album that he created for like a year straight. And he's like, I'm proud of it. I worked really hard on it. And it's like, why wouldn't I like, why would you just write one message that like, especially with like social, it's all algorithm. It's like the likelihood that even your followers saw it, you would get like 10% of your followers. So that was like very formative to me when I heard that. I think I heard that back in like February or something like that. I'm like, oh yeah, you built this feature. You spent this you did this hard work to build this thing. And maybe it's not like, oh, it's like a brand new like version 2.0 of our application. You should size like how you talk about it to like the size of the change. But it's like, oh, you fixed this bug. Like, again, it's all comparison. It's like most companies like don't even fix bugs. So people are embarrassed to post like bug fixes on their changelog. It's like, no, you actually fixed the problem. Like,
yes,
it's like you cared enough to fix this, and you're letting everybody know. And especially, it's like, okay, if I look at your changelog in the past like 6 months, you've got one bug fix. Maybe that doesn't look so great, but yeah, if you've got 2 to 3 updates a week, and like some of them are bug fixes, some of them are new things, some of them are just like tweaks. Like, oh, like customers couldn't find this button over here, we moved it over there, and we're always kind of prompting for customer value. Like, hey, like we think this is really going to help you, find mentions of yourself in podcasts so you can create better brand deal, whatever. Like, kind of doing those, like add in those do a little bit of the sales and a little bit of the marketing for you in those things. I think that the net effect of like seeing, zooming out and seeing like, oh, in a couple of months, this company has posted like over 100. I think we just crossed 100 updates. And if it was me building a brand new startup and like writing some of the code and doing the marketing and things like that, like there definitely wouldn't be 100 updates in the past like year. It would be like, I would try to do it monthly and I would fail. It would be like one every 6 weeks.
That's where I'm at. That's where I'm at right now with Podscan. I sent, and this is, this might sound self-congratulatory, but yesterday I convinced myself to actually send one out, and I did.
That's great.
I have this list of things that I really wanted to talk to people about because these are important features that I built for them. Like people ask me and I built them, and then I tell 1 or 2 individually, hey, it's now live, and then they use it and they're happy, but everybody else is like, I don't know, right? So I pushed that email out to the list, and I got feedback. I actually got people, hey, this is cool. And I was so happy. Because the features have been around for 2 weeks. I just haven't talked
let people know about
right?
this
So I've been trying to get myself to do it weekly, fail horribly, and then do it at least monthly. I think I've sent out, how old is Podscan now? Like 6-7 months. I've sent out 6-7 emails, and I know I probably should have sent out 30, if not 40, with all the little things in between, because every single thing is something useful, something meaningful, something people asked for. And like you said, it could just have been this problem that everybody had until now was fixed. Thank you, this guy, for reporting it. And like you can also shout out people in this context like very easily, because the community of your customers might know each other because they're in the same industry. So you have this opportunity to actually pull people in and give this kind of another reputational gain at this point. You've convinced me in these short 40-some minutes that we've talked about this topic that I should really take this seriously. Not just because it's a conversion inducer or a retention retainer, but those are all great things. But for the product itself, it's a meaningful part of the business to have the history. It's kind of keeping records of your own journey. And if that is to me an important part to building in public. So why do I not automatically have something gather this information for me, or at least have a platform to put this on? This is really cool, man. I'm glad you went into this field. It's really cool.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, and as I kind of look at it, it's like, well, what was the point of building the feature and doing the work if you don't talk about it? Like, you need to like get credit for your code. It's like, you're not like, you've already done, I mean, maybe I'm like downplaying it a little bit, but I think the like actual building, like writing that software and making those changes and figuring out the problems and fixing it, like that was the hard work. And now all you have to do is like, it's like literally the victory lap where you get all these great, feedback, or maybe people give you more ideas and you get like credit and people go, they're cheering for you. And it's like, that's the part that we skip. Like, why are we skipping? That's the fun part. And so yeah, even that was kind of one of our ideas too, of like, hey, like maybe the engine needs tuning, and we need to like, maybe we're far away from people just turning on like full autopilot of just, hey, just post this and email my customers and things like that. But like the bare minimum is that we can give you a rough draft and be that reminder, so that when you go to sit down, once a week or once a month, whenever it is that you're going to do it, you don't have to start from a blank sheet of paper. You can actually like say, okay, cool, here's all these things. I like this line, I don't like this line, and then
Yes.
get it out there.
That's the thing, right? There's a job to be done and you don't want to do it. But if somebody almost does it completely for you and just sends it to you, says, hey, this is what I would send right now. What do you think? Right? It's so much easier to say yes or say no, but then not even think about it, right? Like I think that's what the problem always has been for me, is a priority problem. Like my additional 4 hours of work that I could put into the product, they feel so much more urgent than the necessity to communicate with my customers feel urgent. I know that the necessity is just as urgent, right? It's just as important for me to talk to my customers and share the things that might make them not cancel or might make them upgrade, right? So from a builder's perspective, the tech stuff is always burning hotter. It always feels like there's an explosion somewhere in there.
And that's where your skill set is. Like, and also it's like, this work is hard. Like, it's hard to write, like being a writer is like an actual job. And like,
yes.
Marketing people, especially if, the best of the best in like content marketing, it's like, there's a true art form. It's like, there's really like very little science to it. It's like extremely artistic and like very like, you have to be very smart. And it's like a totally different side of your brain as well. So like, I do that as well. If I have like a task that I'm certain that I have the skills to do, and then I have a task that even if I know it's like extremely important, but I'm not sure, if this is not like conscious, this is subconscious, but I'm like, I will just like kind of ignore or delay upon the thing that I'm like not, or even if like, even product stuff. We have one, if anybody listens to this and is so kind to like sign up for ChangeBot, we have like the screen you see like, hey, we need you to confirm your email. I don't like the way that page is styled. And it's been on like kind of like item 5, 6 of my to-do list every single day for the past 2 weeks. And I just realized I was thinking about it last night. I'm like, this is taking so long because I haven't designed what I want that page to look like. So I'm holding myself back from doing it because it's uncertain. I'm like, so what I need to do is just design what I want that page to look like and like explain to people why we're asking, like, hey, we need you to confirm your email because we're going to be spending AI credits during your whatever, like we need to protect ourselves or whatever the case is, or here's like, if you're confused, book a call with me, all that sort of stuff. And so I think that if 2 weeks ago I would have made my task, think about what this page should have on it, articulate why you don't like the way that it looks and the way that it's performing, then I would have been much more likely to do it. And so it's like that on steroids for updates, because it's like, what do I write about? And like, oh, am I just like bragging too much? Is this worth writing about? And like, how should I phrase it? And how do it's like all those sorts of things. It's just like, I'll just build another feature. But that's dangerous. That's a really, then you get to the point where it's like, oh, we've been working on the product for a couple of months or a couple of years, and now we're trying to get this big customer, and like, or whatever the case is. Even like you said, just getting that feedback, getting that, maybe you burn out. Like maybe you don't have the motivation to keep going unless you see people see like, hey, this is really great that you're doing this. Like, keep doing this. I am actually using your product. People like hearing somebody be like, there are other people on the other side of this that are getting value. Please keep going. Like, that's really useful to hear.
As kind of a means to make people remember that you're there, right? That you're not just a transactional tool, but that there's actually a relationship in there. And yes, I think every time you talk about this, like, you have to tell people that the product does this because they won't find it out themselves. I'm always reminded of if you build it, they will come, and how we know that is such a folly in approaching anything, right? Just building a thing doesn't mean anybody knows about it. We're in a world of constant attention grabbing algorithms. You need to put yourself out there. Just social media is the exact same thing. If you want to get people interested in your business, you have to be present where they are and you have to talk about your business. A changelog is that, but for your customers, for your users, for your prospective users, for your trial users. Like, I'm thinking about this just now, how if I don't have a cadence of at least 10 days, then some of my trial users will never get a product update from me during their trial, and that sucks. Why wouldn't I send them every 3 days so they see, oh wow, I signed up to a thing that's still getting new features. I need to stick with this, right? That's just self-sabotage at this point.
Totally. Yeah. constantly getting better. And yeah, I think that, I mean, one of the things that we figured out very early of like, people that we really wanted to serve are, just people in SaaS, just because that's kind of makes sense to have the recurring benefit. But also like there's kind of a subsection for people that we think are really good for our product of people who are shipping. Because we have had a couple of people come to us already and be like, hey, we want to fill our changelog. And the reason why it wasn't filled is because they just weren't doing any, like they weren't building stuff. And so I do feel like, maybe there's something down the road that we could do for those people. It just doesn't really like, it's just a different problem. It's like a repurposing thing. And it's just,
that's a different stage too, right? Like first you fill it up now and then you do the backfill later.
Yeah. Well, yeah, I also just feel like I just want to stay like super focused. It's like, hey, especially like in your case, like you're doing the work. It's like, it's not like you need some magical system. There's not like some marketing framework that has some like initialism that, you have to follow the tower framework or whatever. It's like, you're doing the work. You just have to talk about it. And it's like, that's the type of company that we really want to support. Because there's like a lot of people out there that are just like really grinding on the product and you wouldn't know it. Like it's not apparent that it's like, oh, this person is like spending legitimately like 60-hour weeks and they have been for 2 years. Like, their product is good and that, it's interesting, but it's like, you don't really get a sense of scale. And so I'm like, those are the people that I want to help because it's like, they're doing all the hard work.
I bet you've convinced a lot of these people to look into changelogs in general, if they haven't already, and to look into ChangeBot right now. So if people want to follow both ChangeBot and Terminal, we didn't even get to talk much about this, and you, and all the other things that you're going to be building over the next year, where do you want them to go?
See, so
yes, the Terminal.
400 page views, our simple analytics for ChangeBot. So when this drops, this needs to be double that number. It's going to look something like this, I think, when the episode drops. But yeah, Terminal's amazing. Use terminal.com. It's been actually like totally like, I feel like this is like the sales pitch, but it's like actually true of like the idea of like being heads down in like maker mode. It's like something like that. Like if I didn't have a little dashboard to show me like what our web traffic looked like, I'd be going to Simple Analytics. Sorry guys, I love you guys. Like, but like I'd be going to their website every day, and then I'd be clicking on stuff and I'd be rabbit holing. And so having it in front of me always, and if there's an issue or like when there was a spike, that's an indication to me that I should go take a look. And then most of the time it's just kind of, little SEO pops here and there. Just having all those notifications and all those dashboards like pushed into this form factor, this hardware form factor has been like actually really useful because there's so much to think about and so much to work on that it's really great. And I'm a part of the developer community as well. And seeing the stuff that people are building, like one person has like a International Space Station tracker, so you can know like when the space station's over. It's like it's really cool. One guy actually, it's totally open source from a firmware perspective. So one guy hacked it so that it's like live updating with his playlist, and so he's got it on his speakers. So anyway, so it's really cool.
Yeah, I hope it is because mine is still in the mail.
Okay,
like in Canada, there's been a postal strike over the last couple of weeks, so I have not received anything. But
oh, that's so funny. Yeah, I saw that. We've had a couple of people complaining about slow delivery, and I just saw because my wife does e-commerce stuff, here and there, and so we got a notification that it was something like the USPS was like, yeah, deliveries are going to be a little bit slow because like Canada's not accepting any of our mail, and like that's had carryover. Like it's like, oh, we have like an entire country's worth of mail like that we have to hold on to, and we don't know what to do with it. So I think it's yeah, hopefully that gets worked out.
Well, they stopped. I think they were sent back to work, and there's a whole political angle to this. I definitely don't want to dive into this, but I guess that's one of those things that you just don't have to think about with a SaaS, right? Like, you don't have to deal with postal strikes or anything like it. But that's cool. No, I'm looking forward to having mine, and I got the developer edition as well, so I'm looking forward to getting my pod scan monitoring into that system as well, just to see like how my system is performing.
Yeah, that'd be really cool to have like a little. We have like Hacker News and Reddit and things like that that'll kind of show you those headlines so you can feel like you're informed, but you don't like click and go through. So that might be cool for you to build a similar one where it's like, hey, like here's like your most recent mentions. And so you don't have to think to go, and you just kind of look. And if you see one that's like, oh, we were mentioned on whatever, CNN, it's like, okay, maybe look into that.
That is one of the customer facing purposes. Definitely, I'm excited to hack on that, and then for my own monitoring too, right? Like, what's the system doing? What are my servers doing? Are the GPUs burning? Right, that kind of stuff. Like there's so much monitoring we can do, and so much the updates that I need to know for my own business. No, I'm excited for Terminal. I think it's crazy to think that you have to work both on something that is as like AI centric and SaaS centric as ChangeBot is, and then you have something that is so almost like deep tech, even though just hardware. But like it's just, you have to deal with firmware, you have to deal with like display logic and updating screens,
getting on
stuff.
people's Wi-Fi. Yes. It's just like, it's the universal issue, and we really tried to build this in a super secure way of where most like IoT things are like, the company can drive and push updates to, but terminals, they can only, they request. And so we can't like proactively push something, like the terminal has to ask for packets. And so that's caused us some pain points, but I think that I feel like so many like IoT devices are just like vulnerabilities, like waiting to it's like, hey, like let's put this like not sufficiently secured device onto your network that the public internet can access. It's just like an insane thing to do.
That's a bad idea.
Yeah, it's a really bad idea. And it's like 99% of those devices. So, we've also had to kind of work through that. It's like, hey, because of our choices, like we can't like, it's like a little bit harder to troubleshoot because we can't just like push stuff. We're like, we can't see what did we send. We have to go back and be like, well, what did you ask for? And then why did this device ask for this? I mean, to kind of like, reverse engineer from that perspective.
Funny how that like privacy and security concerns, that's something you take into every single business. Like the moment you have to do with the internet, to deal with the internet, you have to just make sure that what you do or what your devices do, what your software does, is beneficial and not harmful to your customer. I mean, should go without saying, but it still is it's a concern that may be overlooked in the zeal and eagerness that some people have for building businesses, right?
Totally. Yeah, you can easily build a Trojan horse when you're literally delivering something physical into somebody's house. So it's like only so many people are going to like, eventually we're going to probably snap back away from this, like, but people getting hacked from their like refrigerator and stuff like that. I think like we've only got so many of those left where we're like, okay, we really need to like rethink how we're handling.
Yeah, it's weird that my light bulb can be an attack vector into my home.
Yeah, totally.
It's bizarre. Okay.
Exactly.
Well, let's drop a couple URLs and social feeds here so that people can follow you on your journey. We have Terminal, we have ChangeBot, we have you yourself. Just throw a couple URLs out there that people can mentally click right now.
Useterminal.com for Terminal. You can buy them now. And depending on when you order it, and depending on the state of the manufacturing in the world, we will get it. We've got an update on the website, so we let you know when it's shipping. So we have units in stock right now, but if there's any delays like that, that'll update. So we're really transparent about. I think we're one of the few Kickstarters who like actually delivered a product and continue to do so. So like we try to be really good about that, and global shipping strikes notwithstanding. So that's Terminal. Changebot.ai is ChangeBot, and you can go up there and you can sign up today. And we have the whole self-service flow where you can book a call with me. And then I'm on Twitter mostly, Sierakowski, which will be linked. You don't have to worry about spelling that. And I've been trying out Blue Sky as well. I've been kind of dipping my toe in the water. I feel very much like a noob over there. And in fact, I don't even know, like, I think I'm B. Sierakowski. Maybe I'm Brian Sierakowski. I don't actually know who I am, but we'll find the link.
We'll find it out.
That's how new I am. So yeah, I understand that I've been given the advice that I should be begging to be on starter packs. And so this is an open request. If you have a like SaaS bro starter list, please include me. And then, yeah, and we don't really do anything that's like ChangeBot native right now. I think we have a Twitter account, we have a Blue Sky account, but mostly we're just using that to like reshare while we're kind of in the founder-led stage. It's like you kind of want to talk to us, and Ara's on there as well. So that's one way. If you want to follow us on either of those platforms, you can follow ChangeBot, and then you'll get all the tweets and blue skies from myself and R as well.
All the updates. Literally and figuratively.
Literally all the updates.
Well, I really appreciate you sharing this. I'm so excited. I'm excited that we had this conversation today, obviously learning all about these things, but also that what you wanted to do back in the day actually came to fruition over this year. Plus then Terminal and all the other things that happened besides that. That is so really cool to see. I think founder-wise, you did pretty well. That's really awesome.
I'll give myself a B+.
Take it. That's awesome, man. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much for sharing all of this with me today. It really made me think differently about how important changelogs are. So I appreciate that. And I can't wait for next year when we have another chat and see where it's gone. That's going to be awesome. Thanks so much, Brian. Really appreciate it. And that's it for today. Thank you for listening to The Bootstrapped Founder. You can find me on Twitter at avidkahl, AIVIDKAHL. You can find my books and my Twitter course there too. And if you want to support me on the show, please tell everyone you know about podscan.fm and leave a rating and a review for this podcast by going to ratethispodcast.com/founder. It makes a massive difference if you show up there, because then the podcast will show up in other people's feeds. And that will truly help the show. Thank you so much for listening. Have a wonderful day, and bye-bye.